All right, class, I've been asked to do a quick review of how to draw a break-even chart step by step. That's a really good question because that comes up very often in business, and break-even in general is just a great thing to know. You obviously want to know how many quantities or units you need to sell until you break even. That way you know when you're making a profit because it's your target. So you need to sell a minimum of this amount to break even, because anything after that will be profit. Anything before that, you're actually making a loss. So there is an example on page 240, if you have the 3rd edition Paul Wang books, of a jeans company. A very, very straightforward break-even problem. What I'm going to do is throw up some numbers here so that you guys can get an idea before we make our chart. Because the first step really, I believe, in doing break-even is go ahead and calculate it. You need that break-even point, and then once you work off of that, it'll help keep your lines and your chart looking a lot neater. So the first thing they introduced was a fixed cost of $3,500 in this jeans company. Fixed costs are things that do not change no matter how many units you sell. So it's usually things like rent of the store. Doesn't matter if you sell 1 pair of jeans or 10 pair of jeans or 100 pair of jeans, the rent will be the same every month. The owner isn't going to be like, oh, no need to pay me rent this month, you didn't make any sales. No, he's going to be like, where's my money at? So fixed costs, $3,500 in this equation. Variable costs were $10 per jean. All right, so for every single pair of jeans, it costs them $10 to make. Variable costs are the cost of the actual item, and they will increase as quantity increases. Because if you're making 1 pair of jeans, you're gonna have a lot less fabric and material, for example, than if you're making 100 pairs of jeans. So fabric would be a really good example of a variable cost in this specific case. The last part of the formula you're gonna need is the selling price. Because you're not going to be able to calculate your contribution per unit or your total revenues without knowing how much you're going to sell one for. Now, this number better be bigger than the variable cost, otherwise you're an idiot. No one should ever sell something for less than it costs. It does not make any sense. So in this problem, the selling cost was a beautiful $30 a piece. So you can see definitely their selling price is higher than the variable cost. So they will eventually break even if they sell enough units. So how many units do they need to sell before they break even? There's a couple ways of calculating it. Break even is where your total revenue equals your total cost, or it's when you divide your fixed cost by your contribution per unit. Contribution per unit. So contribution per unit is how much, with every unit you sell, how much is it contributing back into the business, right? It's your selling price minus your variable costs. So these are 2 ways of calculating break even. In this case, we don't know our total revenue because we need to know what quantity we're selling. So you'd have to go and just plug in random quantities until it equals the total cost. So I'm not a big fan of this equation when you're calculating break-even point because you're not really going to know how many units yet. In this formula, you have all the information you need to calculate break-even. Because total revenue, remember, that's your selling price times quantity sold. Well, we don't know how many we're going to sell because we're just trying to figure out how many we need to sell to break even. Your total cost is your fixed cost plus your total variable cost. So however many jeans, once again, you need to know how many jeans did we sell because you have to times that by $10 a pair. So this first formula is kind of useless. So I'm going to use this very high-tech eraser here, and I'm just going to get rid of that. We don't need that right now. When you're calculating break even, right, this is the formula that we need. So you're going to try and figure out, because you have to pay off those fixed costs no matter what. So that's your fixed cost. $3,500 needs to be paid off. Every time we make a sale, we sell it for $30, but it costs us only $10. So that's your selling price minus your variable cost, or also known as contribution per unit. So we have all the numbers we need there to figure out how many of these bad boys do we have to sell before we get that $3,500 of fixed cost covered. So when you do the maths, it ends up being your break even quantity. Remember, when you're calculating break even, it's a quantity. It's not a dollar value. This is a big common mistake people have. 175 jeans. So when you do the math, you take 3,500 divided by 20, it gives you 175. You need to sell 175 pairs of jeans in this example before you've broken even. If you sell 174 pairs, you're making a loss. If you sell 176 pairs, wow, you're making a profit. How much profit? Well, we know already, it's exactly $20 because each time you sell something, your contribution per unit is $20. All right, guys, so step number one to doing a break-even chart, label your axes. Now, we know already that we are selling quantities of jeans, so put jeans in there. Always put the units that you're doing if they're given to you. That's just best practice. At the same time, on this line, we have all of our costs and revenues. These are in dollar amounts. Okay? So put the currency, if it's provided, it does not hurt, okay? And then I've already got the label at the top there. So step number one is make your axes and label everything. Step number two, what I like to do is start with the easiest line, which is the fixed cost line. We knew that no matter what, we have to pay $3,500. So that is actually going to be the starting point of our fixed costs. I'm going to put 0 here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a dot there for later. But all right, so your fixed cost curve, a way you can look at this is all right, no matter how many units we end up doing, now I'm going to put around 300 at the end here. I know that that's fine because I already know the break-even quantity is 175, so I just need that to be somewhere within that range. So I know that even if I sell 300 units, guess what my fixed cost is still going to be? $3,500, because your rent doesn't go up, it doesn't change. Remember, they're fixed no matter what. So this line is actually just a straight line. Now you're going to want to label that your FC, or you can write out fixed cost. That's your FC curve. No matter what, it stays straight because your fixed costs are fixed. They always stay the same regardless of how many units you sell or make. Let's now get our total costs. Our total costs, where are they going to start? So your total cost line is always going to start where? The fixed cost line, because part of your total cost is the fixed cost. So total cost does not start at 0. It'll always start at your FC point, because you need, even if you sold 0, you're still going to have that cost of 3,500. And then obviously the total cost is going to kind of go in a direction like this, all the way up to that point. Hopefully you'd have rulers and draw it as much to scale as possible. I don't here right now, and I've got really messy handwriting. Forgive me, but do better than this. So label once again your total cost curve. All right, so we've got fixed costs, we've got total costs. Is that everything we need for break even? No, remember the break even formula was total cost equaling total revenues. Now total revenues do start at 0, because remember, your total revenue is your selling price times the quantity that you sold. That's how you calculate total revenue. Well, if you sold 0, 0 times $30 in this case is still 0. But as you start to sell, it increases. And then what it's going to do is it's going to end up somewhere up here. Because if your selling price is higher than your variable cost, you can have a much steeper curve. You're going to get up faster. Your revenues are going to increase way faster than your costs. So instead of having a flatter curve, like the cost curve, you're going to have a steeper curve. So that point is always going to be above that point, because your revenue is always going to be higher than your cost if you're ever going to break even. So let's just draw a line there. Okay. And once again, it's better to do this to scale, but that's your total revenue. So guess what we've just figured out now? We have just figured out our break-even point, where they cross. So this is the next step. So you've drawn your fixed cost curve, your total cost curve, and your total revenue. We now have everything we need to look at break-even. This cross point right here is our 175 break even quantity. And then this point right here is going to be pretty much the revenue or costs it takes for when you break even. So to calculate your total cost, you would have to take 175 times it by your variable cost, which is $17.50, and then add that to, so it's just right here. I'm not going to do the math because I'm lazy, but 35 your fixed cost plus your total cost, which is 1,750. It was just literally $10 per jeans times 175 jeans sold, and then those together would give you this number right here, your total cost or total revenue. So that's your break-even quantity. So we've calculated that. Now, there's one more thing that you need to label in a break-even chart, something called the margin of safety. A margin of safety is anything above the break-even point is considered a margin of safety. So the margin of safety in this problem would end up being over here, all the way up to your break-even point, right? So you would label that margin of safety. As long as you're past this point here, you're safe, aren't you? You're going to be making a profit. So even if you decrease your quantities sold, you're still in the safe zone because you're above your break-even point. So those are all the main things that need to be documented in a break-even chart. What is this area under the triangle? That's your profit. Anything you make above that point is your profit. What is this triangle here? That is, unfortunately, a loss. Because think about it. If you're earning your total revenue this much, but you're paying your costs this much, you're losing. So it's very logical. While on the other hand, here, look, you're earning this much, and you're only paying that much at this point. So you're making a profit all the way up until we get to zero. So you're making a loss, the loss gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you're broken even. Now you're making a profit and it's getting larger and larger and larger the more jeans that you sell. Very quick summary. Step number one, okay, calculate your break-even point because that helps you. Step number two, label your chart as well as your axis. Step number three, create the fixed cost curve. Step number four, make the total cost curve. Step number five, make the total revenue curve. Make sure the total revenue starts at zero. The total cost starts at your fixed cost point. Now, the other critical thing is that make sure that your total revenue line is steeper, rises faster than your total cost. Otherwise, they'll never cross. All right. Step number six, label then your break-even point. And then you can put break-even quantity there. If you have the number, put it in. If you don't, just put break-even quantity. Step number 7, I think we're on now, finally, is put in the margin of safety, which is literally just the 2 arrows from the break-even point up until the end of your chart. I hope that's very clear for you. Once again, I find break-even to be very straightforward, very simple. Good luck, everybody.